I'd like to call this meeting to order of the Major Crash Review Task Force. We're meeting at approximately 2:45 on Wednesday, June 24th, remotely via Teams. I'm looking at those who are here of the task force members. We have DDOT, we have the Pedestrian Advisory Council. I believe David from the Bicycle Advisory Council is about to join us. Helen hasn't joined yet from the MAC, and MPD is on the line, so that is a quorum, and Office of Planning's here as well. So we do have a quorum, but we won't really be voting on anything today. And I haven't circulated the meeting minutes from last month yet to review, so we don't need to vote to approve those because I'm having trouble with the audio file, but we can do that next month. And so basically today is going to be a totally in the open session because we're not reviewing crashes. We had some questions come up last month around the rules of our task force as far as the open and closed sessions go and the non-disclosure agreement we all signed. So that's what we're going to cover today. And those documents were circulated ahead of time, the NDA, the finding from the Office of Open Government, and then just our governing document in general. And then Eileen also sent out the enabling legislation that created the task force. So with that, I want to let Glenn Dubin from DDOT's General Counsel's Office walk us through the non-disclosure agreement that we all signed, and then people can ask any questions they have.
Great. Thank you very much. And thank you for letting me join your the group. I had, I think, been on the very first meeting and helped set up with Sam Zimbabwe, but I had not really been involved with the group too much since then. So thanks for having me back. Just generally, I don't want to take too much time because as Jonathan explained to me, there's some questions, and I'm not exactly sure. I have a general idea what the questions are, but I don't want to go too. I want to give as much time as you to ask the question. So we drafted this, the NDA it's basically terms that we've been using that we got from other organizations that had similar members on their group and wanted to provide that information and so that you know what to expect or what is expected of you with regard to sensitive information and how you safeguard that information. I think and it's really and I think the only other important point is that this is not a document that's for the group. It's a document for each individual. So so you as a member have to abide by and uphold these 12 conditions. At this point, are there any questions or how can I help?
So this is Eileen McCarthy. Maybe I'll start because if that's okay with everybody, because I think I want to just sort of make clear I want to address the issue that came up last time, at least my understanding of it. So Glenn, what happened at our last meeting was that we were having a discussion of the NDA, and I said at one point that, if there's information that maybe I learn it in the meeting, but I can also find it in a public source, then I don't consider that information to be something that's where I'm bound by the NDA. And for that, I rely on Section 2 of the NDA, which is the exclusions from confidential information, specifically subsections A and C, which exempt information that's publicly known at the time of disclosure or subsequently becomes publicly known through no fault of the undersigned, that is me, or it's learned by the undersigned through legitimate means other than from the task force or any other task force representative. And for me, this is like I pull a lot of information from MPD news releases, from open data, from FARs, sometimes from court records, from last year's report, and some other public sources. And I should say, none of this is personal, private information. Even if that was public, I would not be inclined to share that kind of information, except I do research and share the court cases where people are charged criminally. And so that's my interpretation. So I'd like to hear if you think that's a reasonable interpretation.
I think it is, yes. The only thing is, and I'm not really just trying, I am just trying to just on the edges here, just how you use the information, can be important too. In other words, public information, there's lots of public information, but if because of information you have from this organization that is important, and so now it's not as you're not dealing in the information, but you're saying, oh, this piece of information is really important to you. You really need to look at this article. Again, you're stressing that importance because of something that the public doesn't know about that importance. That's not what you're saying. I understand that, but I just want to sort of give you.
Yeah, and so I'll say that the main way that I use this is, I, along with David and Helen, were the reps of the advisory councils. And, I have to share some information with the rest of the members of the advisory council for us to operate normally. And I don't tend to share very much. I usually wait until the draft report is ready. And then once everybody on the task force is ready to share the draft report of the agency, I share it with the pedestrian council. But if a crash comes up, in discussion for the council, or, occasionally, like when DDOT goes out on the high crash intersection visits, some of them are to these crash sites. And if there is something I know about the crash and it's public information, I might bring that to bear. And I'll give a quick example. Terry and I went to a high crash intersection visit at First in Florida, where a bicyclist was killed in a crash involving a pickup truck driver. And while we were there, the advocates were asking about speed as a factor in the crash. And I turned to Terry and asked him if I could share the information about how sort of the mechanics of the crash before I did it. But this is a crash where a bicyclist hit the truck. The truck didn't hit the bicyclist. And that was the answer to the question of the truck's speed was not relevant to the crash. So, that's kind of how I share it. I don't go off and tweet information generally about crashes, although I have a spreadsheet of criminal cases, and I have shared that on Twitter. So that's about it. One thing I'll say is there are two issues kind of recur. One is the contributing factors of the crash. And there is a statutory requirement that DDOT and MPD make that information public. And open data has some of it, but not all of it. It should really have all of it. So open data is not quite in compliance, and sometimes it's wrong. So if a question comes up about the contributing factors to the crash, and I can verify it somewhere else, I usually share it, but it would be good to be able to share that information, even where the only source is the task force, because, like I said, it should be public. The fact that it's not public is problematic. But under the statute, under DC Code 50-19551.02, the contributing factors are supposed to be published. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Oh, I see. So it has not been made public yet, but it should have been made public.
Right. Yeah. Or it's been made public and the information is wrong. That happens a lot with speed and impairment, and that's something that last year's task report talks about. Information on open data is often wrong.
Gosh, that is a important question.
I'm having trouble hearing Glenn.
Oh. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's not you, it's someone else.
I think that's something I don't. That's an interesting question, and I don't think I can answer the question right now. I need to do some research on that.
Okay.
But I think that's an important question to answer, and both correcting the information and I guess the first issue of information that should have been made public but has not been made public.
Right.
And yeah, I'll have to investigate those.
Thanks. And then one of the other issues that came up, and I think this is one of MPD's big concern is, you know, we do get into sort of discussions where we share our personal opinions about things. And I want to assure everybody I never share anyone's personal opinion other than my own. So that to me is like, I don't know that it's necessarily covered by the NDA, but I would not share it. And I don't know if there's anything protecting I don't know if there's a deliberative process privilege that applies here, which might apply in, other circumstances.
Well, I think I would say anything that's being discussed in a closed session would have that confidentiality. Anything that's being discussed in an open setting, you have to assume that there's a reporter in the room recording.
Right.
And so the information in that setting would not be confidential.
Right.
This is Jonathan. That's kind of a topic I hope we get into because we have Vega either about to join or already joined, how the NDA and the closed session interact, because I'm glad Eileen brought up the question about, whether it's already public, for example, which the NDA clearly excludes. But then I feel like there's another layer of rules that relate just to the fact that it's a closed session, if that's what the example we're talking about is, that I don't know if that supersedes, what the NDA says or that sort of thing. Like maybe there's information that is public, but the fact that it was discussed in the task force at all, and if that happened in the closed session, therefore it shouldn't be mentioned because no allusions to what happened in the closed session should happen at all. Like those are some of the things I'm wondering about, but maybe we'll talk about that with Vega.
Yeah. I'm going to stop talking in a minute, but I just want to throw one other question to Glenn, and it may not be yours, but this came up at the end of our last session. The statute we operate under prohibits us from considering criminal cases while they're still pending, but it doesn't address civil cases in which the district is a party. And we have actually looked at 2 cases in which the district is a party to a lawsuit. And so one of my concerns is whether we should talk about those cases in our report. We haven't yet said anything publicly about them, but I am, kind of a minor concern. It's probably a small risk, but there's probably a small risk that we say something in the report that might potentially undermine the civil case. So I don't know if you have thoughts about that. And I'm muting now and letting other people talk.
Well, hi, this is David Craner. So this, I think, came up because, oh, sorry.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, Glenn.
Oh.
Can people hear me?
Oh, great.
Yes.
Yes. By the way, I muted someone who called in. I apologize. I think you called in. If you press *6, you'll be unmuted. I just heard some background noise, and then I realized you can't tell it. So if you're muted and we can't hear you, press *6. Okay.
I don't. I think they're different. I think a criminal case is different from a civil case, and that's not what was intended by the legislation. Um, so I do. You know, again, you know, provided whatever information is discussed in the closed session, is confidential.
Well, it's confidential unless we all agree to publish it. So, my thinking is that once we write a report and we've agreed on what goes in the report, then it's okay to disclose it. I have trouble thinking.
That's right. That's right.
I have trouble thinking that I think it's highly unlikely that it would do anything. Anything we say would be so far afield from what the government's arguing in its case that it would jeopardize the case. But it's a theoretical possibility.
I mean, you're conducting your business. I don't know. I mean, what you're reaching your conclusion independently. So I agree with you. I don't. Having said that, I mean, there's the government could contact the task force to discuss it, but I guess that's a little. I don't see the risk as being great either.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. All right. Now I'm muting and other people.
David, did you have a comment?
Oh, only that this started with me, I think, because I mentioned that my wife is doing defense, or I'm sorry, not working the defense side anymore, working the other side. And so one of her cases came up that was discussed in one of these meetings, and I immediately cut her off and said, we just shouldn't even talk about it, because what if I had a facial expression response that was somehow telling? So, and that was the last we talked about it. And, I certainly don't talk to her about the cases that come up here. And she's out of the house right now, for example, just to be safe. So, I just want everybody to know, full disclosure that was going on. But I have every intention of living up to the NDA. And so I just want to make sure that everybody didn't have a problem with that. And it seemed like there might have been one or two people who did, but, I wanted to address that beforehand. That was kind of how it all started, as I recall.
Thanks, David. And yeah, I don't know Glenn, or if it's Bega, or who is supposed to sort of judge or like measure the dynamics in David's example.
Bega, this would be a decision for Bega. What Bega can do, if it comes to it, if the group thinks it's important enough, they can issue a safe harbor letter. So they'll gather and discuss it, and conduct essentially an investigation, interview you, and I guess I don't know, anyone else that's involved, and then issue you a letter and say, we don't see any problems here. You're complying with the NDA. You can proceed. Or alternatively, what actions might need to be taken to ensure, distance. So it's if it doesn't you don't have to go to Bega for safe harbor. It's something they offer. It's kind of a service that they provide. So just an option.
Okay, well, that is helpful to know. And I think the task force kind of as a whole, maybe in a future meeting maybe we can discuss the topic again to, decide how the group wants to proceed. And if any agencies or any members of the task force like still have a concern with, that example. Does anyone else have any other questions or hypotheticals for Glenn regarding the non-disclosure agreement?
All right, and if there are any other questions, you certainly can contact Linda or Jonathan, or and both of them are free to hand out my contact information directly, and you can contact me directly as well. So thank you.
Thank you,
Glenn.
Let
me add, Jonathan, let me add one thing from it. What I'm hearing here. Based off of in the closed session that you're allowed to ask questions, or we accept questions and give opinions, educated opinions, and off of those, then the information that you're getting at that point is influenced by a question, and our response to the question no longer is the same public information that you can get elsewhere. And as far as maybe we need to adjust the question levels of what questions that we'll answer if these cases can possibly go to any court in the future. I guess our concern is the questions in it. We're going to give facts of the case, but we're probably going to have to stop with the questions like right now. And then that's I guess that's a question to Glenn, but it's a concern of MPDs and the detectives.
Yeah, thanks, Terry. And I think it might also, I don't know if it's a good segue to Johnny from Bega, because he can answer, like you said, specifically that if any of those questions that are posed to MPD during the closed session, how that affects, the confidentiality of everything versus what Glenn described with the non-disclosure agreement. So I don't know, Johnny, would you like to, start talking about just kind of the closed session and all that entails? I think you're on mute. Linda, can you unmute Johnny?
I don't think I can, but Johnny, it should be, like if you move your mouse on the screen, it should pop right up. There's like a little microphone symbol and with an X through it. And if you just click on that, I can only mute people, not unmute.
I'm back.
Okay.
I went.
Was that Terry? Did you want to jump in? Johnny, we're still
I lost
my
call got cut for a second, but I'm back. I
apologize. Oh, great, Terry. Thanks. We're trying to get Johnny Barton unmuted.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I got on a little late, so I'm not sure if I got the full scenario, but let me just start about the closed sessions. Open meeting minutes and recording and the like are made public. Closed session materials generally are never made public. So if there are discussions that take place in closure, that information is not available to the general public, and is generally not subject to a FOIA request. So I'm not sure if that answers the question. And I understood someone asking about whether an MPD officer was being questioned during the closed session, and how that relates to whether that information stays within the group, or whether it's somehow disclosed outside of the group.
Yeah, I think that's at least one example we're thinking of, but I mean, it's kind of central to the task force because that's, what most of the discussions are about. And I guess to put it in the form of a question, yeah, like if there's a question posed to MPD, and like Officer Thorne was saying, if that's Sergeant Thorne, sorry, if that's something that involves them sharing their opinion about something which is not, hasn't been like publicly stated before, and it's not in like the public version of a press release about this case that goes out, because that opinion was shared in the closed session. Does that sort of automatically mean that it can't be repeated by in some other setting?
What takes place in the closed meeting stays there, whether it's recorded or in meeting minutes. What someone, if you're talking about members of the task force repeating it outside, or I'm not sure if I'm understanding.
Yeah, that would be the example. To paint a better picture, it could be where some of our members, like Eileen or David, are on other advisory councils, like the bicycle advisory council or pedestrian advisory council. They deal with the same subject matter. So we kind of covered earlier that at least in the non-disclosure agreement, it makes it pretty clear what we've all signed, that without getting into the closed or open sessions, if there's a fact that is already public knowledge, it would be okay for Eileen to go to her other advisory council and share that whatever, this crash happened on Saturday, so she can repeat that. Even though we discussed it in the task force, it's public knowledge because MPD put a press release out that said this crash happened on Saturday. So that's fine for her to repeat to the pedestrian advisory council because it's already public knowledge. But I guess the question is, if a detail like that was discussed in the closed session, and I guess it doesn't really matter if it was public before. Like I'm trying to figure out, at least for me, like if one thing supersedes the other. Like if it was discussed in the closed session, should we generally not be repeating it outside of that room at all?
Okay. It's a couple things. First of all, if it has already been released by another district agency, then it's already out in the public domain. If there's certain facts that are left out due to privacy concerns, then if you all discuss those facts within the closed session, then that would have to stay in that closed session. Anything that goes beyond what, say, MPD put out would may be problematic, especially if it, deals with some privacy issues or concerns. So, yes, if it's already out in the public domain, but no, I would not go beyond what's already out in the public domain.
So this is Eileen again. Maybe a couple of examples might help us. And I'd also, I need to hear from Terry what the distinction is between facts and opinions. So for example, one of the issues I raised earlier, and you may not have been on by yet then, Johnny, was that, say I ask about the driver's impairment, whether the driver was impaired in the meeting. And the detective tells us the driver was impaired by alcohol or drugs, and if it was alcohol, their BAC level was X. There is a requirement in DC law for information about contributing factors to be published by DC, by DDOT and MPD. And open data sometimes includes that information, but it often gets it wrong. So I've learned from the meeting that the driver was impaired, but open data says that they weren't. Now, FARS, which is a federal database, might have the correct information, but usually it's delayed by about a year, so I can't use that. So my question would be, what are your thoughts on that? And does MPD consider factual information from the meeting to be something that can't be shared? I have no interest in sharing MPD's personal opinions. Sometimes it is difficult to tell the difference between an opinion and a fact when MPD talks about things. So it may be that it would be good for them to clarify that, but there are things like impairment level, whether speed was involved, what type of car it was, that are, they're not personal. There's nothing personal about that because we're not connecting it to the individual driver. We're talking about it without naming names or personal details. And it seems like, given that that information is required to be public, that it should be something that we can share.
Okay. Now, help me just a little bit. An accident happens tomorrow. A major crash accident happens tomorrow. How soon would that information get to you all as a task force?
It could be anywhere from 3 months to a year. It depends on the outcome of the crash. If the driver, if there's a criminal case against one of the people involved, we won't see it for at least a year or two because we don't see it until after all the proceedings are done. But if it's a crash in which say it's a single driver crash and the driver is killed, we see those crashes fairly quickly. Okay. It could be within a few months because there's no chance of a criminal case coming.
And I'm presuming that MPD has already completed its investigation.
Right. We don't see anything until the investigation is done and a decision is made by the prosecutors to either take a case or to decline to prosecute a case. And if they prosecute, we don't see it until the prosecution is completely finished. The court case is done.
And I understand that you all have to make public, certain information. I think the parties to a major crash can get pictures and video within 14 days.
Yeah, I think that's a requirement for MPD.
Okay.
To give them.
So when you all list your information, it's general and not specific. It just say an accident occurred, make and model of the car, whether someone was type of injuries, but no specifics, no personally identifiable information. No personally
identifiable information. If it helps, we can send you last year's report. We go into a little more detail, but there's no personally identifiable information, but it does say, it occurred at this location, the basic mechanics of the crash, who hit who, or which driver, which car hit which other car or person. And then I think we put in some information about weather conditions, lighting conditions. I think that's about it, but there's no, if someone knew a party to a crash, they would probably recognize it based on location and the date. But
Eileen,
yeah.
So I think we're at a bit of a getting into the gray zone of things that we might put in the final report.
Right.
Basically, right? But that are not.
I'm talking about what we did last year.
Right. Well, and not about and think so. Just like an example, like maybe DUI was proven later than in the formal report that was public, or FARS possibly. I mean, at least some of our crashes are already in FARS, I guess, by the time we're writing about them. But maybe not. Whatever. So say we know that. I guess one question is, maybe we try and make a more, as we go through the meeting, as we go through the crashes, we try and make a more formal record of what we're determining as part of the meeting. Mm-hmm. all agree on this will go into the final report, basically. Because Terry, from your perspective, you would get a review just like you do for the final report. And there would be no chatter in between that. And if it's really an issue of like, my very general impression is if we're not sure, it's basically NA or no sometimes for especially seatbelt use and DUI. But especially DUI, there may be later data based on toxicology that's not included in the original open data report that we might want to include in the final report.
Right.
And I guess that would be.
And that's, you know, I'll say again, it's required to be published by law. So.
Right. Well, I don't see much of an issue here. To two things, I think your non-disclosure agreement already references if it's made public, it's already made public that you all are at liberty to discuss it, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong. But again, if there's no personal identifiable information, and you know, no kind of way to connect the dots outside, I don't think it's an issue.
Yeah. There are some crashes that are more unique than others. So thinking of specifically a crash that the district is in lawsuit around. Anyway, but let me just go back to, like, I hear what you're saying, Eileen, that should be in the report and it can be in ours. It's a bit of a gray zone if it's not in their report and we haven't issued our report yet. Does that make sense? So I know it should be, but it's just.
Yeah, and it's, you know, it's very rare that I have some need to tell the PAC about some of the details, but you know, I do have to, I am their rep, as David and
Sure.
Lennar.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Because I know you said that before, and can you explain a little bit more what you feel will be most useful to PAC in their discussions and what you want to bring to them? Because again, that could be stuff we could be putting in the final report, and that would give MPD a chance to review it before it's communicated. Or maybe we do something more interim where we create documents that are shorter throughout the year as well as the final. I don't know.
Well, you know, I think I have a template that I use that has all my questions on it. And I do two versions of it. One is what I consider a public version that I share with the PAC that is based purely on information that I can get from public sources without relying on the task force. And I make that available to the PAC. Then I do a non-public version that's only for me and other task force members. And that's on our, you know, kept in our now our Google Drive. And I don't share that with the PAC, but I do obviously use it to help write the report. And so what I want to be able to keep sharing the public version of my form. And then I want to be able to share the draft report when we're all ready, you know, satisfied with it, but also at a point when it's, you know, the PAC can give meaningful input. I don't necessarily ask for their approval of it because given all the agencies involved, it can be really unwieldy to try to get approval from the PAC because we have to do it in an open meeting and blah, blah, blah. But I do present it to them and we have a discussion and I take their comments into account. But I don't do that until every member of until I finish writing it to begin with and until every member of the task force is satisfied with it. And I think my concern is that, you know, I don't want to create a environment where the discussion isn't freewheeling, but I also don't want, you know, later to be accused of sharing something that I shouldn't have shared because I thought MPD was stating a fact and they were just stating their opinion.
Can I just talk a little bit about, and maybe this will help a little bit, about the purpose of a closed session and what it does? In particular with your task force, the provision that you would rely on and have been relying on to go into closed session is the by statute, and by statute that means particularly FOIA. The former director issued an advisory opinion and found that because of the nature of some of the photographs, and some of the information that you all would be discussing would be personally identifiable information, that information would allow you to go into a closed session to discuss that. That to me draws a line between fact and opinion. You're talking about somebody's name, date of birth, tag numbers of the vehicle, a picture of a decedent, or a picture of someone being taken away in an ambulance. Those are the things that that opinion dealt with, and those are the issues that I'm referring to when we're talking about discussions. So that kind of information should stay within the task force, and it's particularly during a closed session.
And I have no problem with that. I completely agree.
So, Cherry, can I check in with you as the person thinking about how this affects your work? Is this settling things more from your perspective? Because I felt like the last meeting, it felt like a lot was up in the air about what goes in the different buckets, confidential, not confidential. Is it helping what we're talking about, this idea that there's things in open data that are basically the public record, and then there's things that are separated out as confidential?
I just want to make sure everybody knows that Terry will take this information back through his chain of command. So anything that this isn't Terry's decisions, I'm going to take what I gather here through my chain of command and come up with a response to it. I think that what I've had talk to me through my chain of command is the concern that, and I'm repeating myself again, that when the membership of the task force has the ability to ask us questions in reference to, it could be even public knowledge, that public knowledge then becomes influenced by them asking questions. That's a concern. It now becomes a different perspective than the public knowledge that they have the ability and insight to be able to repeat. So that's a concern. The other concern is that I make sure that I understand myself what occurred last meeting. And what I understand, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is David said that his wife was an attorney, a defense attorney on a case that we have already discussed. So we are trying to understand, it's a question, whether that case has been compromised. Now, what we heard was David say that him and his wife, their jobs overlap sometimes. So those are concerns of ours. Now, that's why we're standing here today, for me to understand everybody's opinion on that and your general counsel's opinion on that. And I will take that back through my chain of command.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure about all the facts of the case that the gentleman just mentioned, but as you well know, a person can recuse themselves from hearing and sitting on and discussing a matter that they may have some sort of conflict in.
Yeah, but so we had spoke about that case several sessions ago. And after several sessions passed, he then let us know after another session at the end of it that his wife was a defense attorney. And I'm just trying to make sure I have these facts right, that his wife was a defense attorney in a case that we previously discussed. So that's just what I'm trying to make sure, that I get all the facts straight prior to bringing up my chain of command.
I feel like that's only a concern if you don't believe that the NDA has any power. Like, we're already putting faith in the NDA. So either you always had faith in it and so it doesn't change anything, or you never had faith in it, in which case we should have never been having these discussions. Like, it doesn't change anything, in my opinion.
Here's the thing. I think that what this conversation is illuminating for me is that we could be clearer about what we are getting out of those discussions. which I think will clarify for you, Terry, your like what we need from MPD in these discussions. And I think, you know, we sometimes ask questions that are not really relevant even to things that we're interested in, and are just, and that's like I'm saying myself in that too, just because we're interested in what happened on a particular investigation as the story unfolds. And I think that one way to move forward with all this is to be clearer about what we are kind of taking away from the session that will go into the final report, because that is something that you're going to have a review over. And I think what David is saying is he, I guess there would be one open question would be if in the future one of us hears that we're going to discuss whatever D20-20 and has some personal connection to that case, that we would recuse ourselves, whether it's through legal implications or something else, and that we should open the door to doing that in the future. Now, this is an interesting case because I think David raised it to say, like, just so you know, I am not discussing this, even though, you know, there's a concern. And I think, Johnny, that's where Glenn was talking about a safe harbor letter, which I don't totally understand the purpose of, but in this particular case, it would be something to clarify that, you know, Dave, I don't know, I would think of the benefit of something if David would reiterate his commitment to the NDA or something like that, which you've already done, David, in this conversation, I appreciate, but and not sharing any of those information that came from the session as part of that case. Anyway.
And I understand that to some of you all on other related public bodies, is it necessary to discuss? And again, it goes back to the purpose of a closed session. The purpose of a closed session is to keep from the public certain information. Otherwise, it can be disclosed. It can be done in an open session. So there's a specific purpose for a closed session, and that's to keep the information within the public body. So is it something that you all would consider simply not discussing, you know, notwithstanding if someone else knows about it or how they knew about it, if you go back to another public body and that issue comes up? Because it's kind of defeating the purpose, you know, and it's mixing kind of apples with oranges a little bit about what shouldn't be said and what should be said. Everything in the closed session stays in the closed session. Even when there's an issue with whether someone has gone into inappropriately in a closed session, we get the tapes and we listen to it, and generally that information stays within our office. It's not something that's disclosed to the public. So the specific purpose for going into closure is to keep the information within the task force or within the public body because of the need to.
So the reason we go into closed session is to protect privacy, right? So that's not something I share, but the Pedestrian Council generally is interested in all crashes that affect pedestrians. So one of the issues that comes up repeatedly with us is the connection between fatalities and the involvement of SUVs in crashes. There's a fair amount of data now nationally that SUVs are more likely to kill people if the driver involved in a crash is driving an SUV. So one of the issues we got involved in discussing last year before this report was, how many cases that we looked at involved SUVs. And at that point, we didn't have enough. I said, we don't have enough data to say. That's going to come up again this year. And, I would not consider the fact that a vehicle was an SUV to be a piece of private information. And I'm not necessarily discussing, the specific details of every crash, but I want to be able to say, the pedestrian council sees this many, we see the the task force saw this many crashes involving pedestrians and X% of them involved SUVs, and share that with the pedestrian council. Because I am their representative.
Okay. So is it possible for you all to make I think it's a clear distinction between what's confidential and of privacy concerns versus what's just generic information. The privacy and confidential stuff will specifically be something that has to be in a closed session. The generic information is something that may not have to be discussed in the closed session.
I think that could be difficult because we go back and forth,
So here's what I want to do. I think this is a little bit of a tangle still in this discussion, and as Terry noted, he needs to go have a discussion internally on his end. But I guess I've taken this whole discussion as honestly an opportunity to revisit, like I said, what we're taking from these discussions and thinking about how to make it as useful as possible. Because right now we're like whatever, is that the fishing with a trawler or whatever, where you just like grab everything and then pick through it later to decide if there's something useful. We don't have to be that broad brush. There's also data already available, especially for past years, through open data, but also through FARS, where we could also, for things like vehicle mix, for example, we could be looking at the whole region, which isn't necessarily our policy, but we also don't affect vehicle policy, right? That's a federal decision. So it's like, there's pieces of that could be done differently. And I don't think Leon was able to join in through all the different iterations of this, the technology in this meeting, but Leon's team has a contractor that can help us with some other analyses that I've thought about for pulling in some of this very basic data about other crash types that are less serious, that are non-fatal, but are still quite serious and could include life-altering injuries, which are also obviously of real concern to us. So I think it's an opportunity to kind of look at everything we're doing, be a little more targeted, think about what we're putting in our report this year and what that might mean for the type of crash review we do going forward. Not because we won't get the same information, but because we'll already have certain information we want to get. And maybe we can make it easier, frankly, on your end, Terry, for you guys to give us that information and not have to tell the story every time. And it might make it the whole thing a little more of your being able, I guess my hope is that you would be able to come to a meeting and lend your expertise on how to understand sometimes more complex crashes, and your perspective on traffic safety in general versus, going through all the details on each crash that we do review, in sometimes details that we just are not going to use as part of our report or analysis in any case. So why don't we do this? The big thing upcoming is that we do need to I would like to get our report done for the previous year, which is, I guess we're calling it the 2019 report because we're theoretically covering crashes in 2019.
It's actually 2018.
2018, okay.
It's
well, anyway,
2019 report covering crashes from 2018 and
let's just say,
yeah.
Okay, report that needs to still be finished, and thank you, Eileen, for all your work on it. So let's think about, maybe for next time we can think about how to approach that report. And Eileen's already been taking a stab at it. I know we thought about just updating from last year, which is fine with me. We can think about if there's anything else we want to add. And then maybe thinking ahead to like what we want from next year's report. And I guess I'm thinking specifically if like we had, I'm going to forget the right number, 6 findings from last year. Is that right? 7?
7 maybe.
Something like that. Anyway, so we had 7 findings. We can literally revisit those same findings this year. And then, like Terry, getting back to your concern about feeling too freewheeling and potentially saying something that could get you in trouble, or I guess is the concern that, we could just focus on those 7 findings and whether things fall under that. And I think there are issues with the data. We all know about them. And Terry, I think you've been on the Traffic Records Coordinating Committee, which is meeting tomorrow for a long time, so you know them very well. And maybe this is an opportunity, at least for these crashes, to not necessarily correct those records, but at least get a different take on it. I do know I was surprised by the number of FARS crashes that list, for example, DUI, which is different than the other numbers I've seen. FARS, for those who don't know, is only fatalities. It's a fatality analysis reporting system maintained by NHTSA. And in any case, it would be interesting to think about that. And part of my goal and what I'm doing is to shed light on actions we could take at the end of the day. Not us, but the PAC could make a recommendation to NHTSA that they address, vehicle safety issues. I mean, forget vehicle size.
Yeah, I totally agree that NHTSA should do that, but the PAC's statutory mission is to advise the mayor and the DC council and DC agencies, so we can't advise NHTSA. I could personally, write them a letter. I'm not sure how far that would go.
Well, but that's
we can advise DDOT to do it.
Yeah, I do think DDOT, DDOT could unite with other Vision Zero programs around the country and petition NHTSA to.
Yeah. I mean, the other big thing that, forget vehicle size, like in Europe, I'm going to forget the right name for it, but basically there's a car safety assessment program here in the US, and it has a parallel track in other countries, other regions of the world.
Yeah.
And in Europe, they have a test that tests how hard a pedestrian's head, obviously a standard size pedestrian head, will hit the hood, and like whether it's likely to be fatal or not. And in response to that test, manufacturers in Europe, not here of course, because here we don't have that test, but in Europe they've changed things that lessen the blow, that make it more likely that someone will survive the crash. And that's they don't even have to come up with that. It's like copy and paste.
Right. And they're going to have speed. Then they're going to have speed bumps there too.
Can I just have another question?
Low hanging fruit there, in my opinion. But yeah.
Johnny has.
Sorry, go ahead, Johnny.
Yeah, I just have a question. If you can clarify something for me. I have attended some of your open meetings, but of course never been to a closed meeting. Just in general, what type of information do you all get that you discuss in closed session?
So Johnny, some key things that we talk about are, we do view videos, typically, sometimes photos of the crash scene. We do talk about, these are all closed in terms of criminal proceedings, but sometimes we discuss the investigation that went on, like what it indicated. I think, Terry, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think if during the warrant, as part of the criminal proceeding, you receive data from the, I always call it the black box, whatever it is inside the vehicle that gives, for newer vehicles, it gives the speed and impact. That if you retrieve that data, that is something we hear about, but that's not necessarily in a public report anywhere. Is that, I'm trying to think what other private things. Sometimes we hear, I guess, the name of the person. We do get the VIN, the vehicle identification number.
Yeah, that's in FARS, so it's not.
That's also in FARS.
Yeah, it's not private.
I think one of the concerns, and we keep talking about hard evidence, and we're not concerned about hard evidence. It is what it is. It's the questions in which you ask a educated opinion from a reconstructionist. And that's where it becomes concerning, because then you're being influenced, or then when you have the ability to ask the questions, you now know the opinion of what that detective would take onto the stand of a civil lawsuit. So these are where it gets concerning, because these cases that we're discussing, the detective's concerns are they still have to go on the stand of a civil lawsuit down the road. They still have the potential to have to do that. And it's the questioning. So if you sit there and ask me 10 questions, you now know my defense, or what direction my mindset is for if I ever was on a stand. And then you're influenced, or either way, one way or you believe or don't believe, off of the response to that. It's not the fact that there was a red car in a crash. It's the 20 questions that come from that car.
So you're saying,
and I'm a big fan of what Linda said just a little bit ago. Maybe it's our issue, and we need to reel back on what part of what answers that need to be to the task force, as opposed to what we say this isn't part of what we're doing here. And we need to wheel back the questions.
I think the number one question, and this is partly because of my job right now, but my number one question I would be loath to give up is the estimate of speed, where it's hard to establish it. And I know that that is something you might be concerned about, and I'm just trying to think about how to frame that in a way that feels like it's not creating a problem. So just for one example, say it's an older vehicle, so there's no kind of crash box that's going to tell you the actual speed. And there's some problem with the crash dynamics where there's no skid marks, or it's very difficult to reconstruct the speed, but it seems excessive. And so I think based on your experience, you would say, like, I guess 60, like just based on all these other things that I've seen, the level of damage to the vehicle, but that's not something you put in your report, right? Barry.
Yeah, I agree. Those are the concerns, stuff like that. So where we have an open discussion. So you now influence, when you take what the public knowledge, what you have in public knowledge, you're now influenced from a discussion that we have in there. That's what the detective's concerns are. And then later down in the road, when they're on the stand and they get questions, have you ever discussed this with somebody? What was your response to that? That's where they get concerns, because even evidence could change and stuff. So I think I agree with Linda where I say that I think everything's fine. We just need to not be as open with this discussion of our opinions on stuff.
One thing that occurs to me is that, and I think I've talked about this before, is that if we had, and I'm not sure what the right document is, but generally we rely on MPD's oral presentations for this, and we don't see very much beyond the videos and photos occasionally. But there is, there's a PD-10 report, there's the final case summary. If there are documents that MPD would be willing to share with us, which would also, let's be real here, they'd also be I think they'd be foiable in the same case that MPDs worry about testifying in. And we could also, get them in a redacted form for our own use if that makes MPD more comfortable. But that might make it easier for us to sort of look at the information that's available that's set in stone, and then if we want to have a discussion with the detective, we can do that.
And the other thing I will say is, like, we have now, after every fatal crash, we have a DDOT has a site visit, which Sergeant Thorne or someone from his staff typically attends, and we do mostly talk about design because that's what DDOT does, and that could be the same discussion focused on in these sessions also, and talk about options or concerns. And we've anyway, so we could be mirroring that more in this session, albeit obviously delayed, because those site visits we do within a month right now of the crash occurring.
Right. And you put the report on the website.
Yeah, we put the report on the website, which is focused on just mechanics of the crash per se, and then anything we observed and anything short-term actions and long-term actions, basically. That Charlie's been taking the lead on, which has been awesome. It's really hard to wrangle all the people to.
And it's great you're doing that. They are, though. They're focused more on engineering issues, right?
Yeah,
which is natural.
What we do. So.
I think another thing that could help us would be, MPD has a tendency to tell us which cases we're going to do at a meeting, either the day before or the morning of, and it might be easier for, at least I will say, frankly, it would be easier for me to prepare if I had them at least a few days before.
That's always an issue,
or,
but
for
we can.
people, or for people to decide if they need to recuse.
Right, that's a good point. I guess I do have a very general question about that, Terry, and maybe we can talk about this offline, but if we wanted to, frankly, make your job during the meeting a little easier by kind of pre-processing a little of the information into a written document, just how we would go about that. And we can talk about that offline, but obviously, because of my group's role, we're very invested in making sure that all happens so we could, help you guys out, because I know you have a lot on your plate, so.
Let me just, Bridget had a comment. I want to make sure that I don't forget it. She said, we have access to driver records, which includes private information. I'll just add that I think, if there's a criminal record, that's public. So we're talking about the DMV. I think we're talking about the DMV records of civil offenses, not criminal offenses.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, let's do this. We need to work on a report. We need to think about what's going to go out in that, including in the kind of section where it just has the description of the crash, which might actually be a good exercise for us to discuss all these, what's in, what's out in terms of the public report. So maybe for the next session, we can review one from last year and talk about what's in, or if there's anything should be added or taken out. And then we can also go through the findings and see if we're, going for the same findings, or if we may need to add or take some away. And so Eileen, you and I can work on that in between now and then, and we can focus on that at our next session. And then Terry, if you don't mind, I'll reach out to you offline and find a time we can talk through some way to honestly lighten your load coming into the meetings, so that you're just there more as an expert participant versus kind of being tasked with the full presentation, etc. Just maybe that will make it easier to kind of manage the information flow before you come. And then also maybe we can just start thinking about maybe at the end of the meeting, we literally create that public document that is, what we will go into put into the final report eventually, or something like that. And that's something that we can all work with, versus having a more open-ended conversation based solely on your presentation, which may put your officers on, or your detectives may find it easier to think about specific questions versus having to present the case and go through it every time. I don't know. Think about that, and we'll talk offline about that. But I do think for the next session, we should work through the report, so we can also make progress on that anyway. And we can kind of discuss as we go, because we're putting information about each crash in the end. I think it's Appendix B or something. I forget which one, but there's one of the appendices that has just a short factual write-up of the crash that doesn't include PII, personal information. But we can make sure that that's what we want to have in it again this year. Okay. Anyone, any other additions? I have two offline conversations, one with Eileen and one with Terry. Anybody else, anything for the good of the order? Or for Johnny?
I have one quick, no, go ahead. Somebody else, go ahead.
Would you all be able to send me one of your prior year reports? I'd just like to take a look at it.
Yeah.
We'll get that right over to you, Johnny. Jonathan, can you send that?
Yep.
Okay. It's online. Everything's online, but it is online.
No, I can get it offline, man. That's no problem.
We'll send you a link though. Don't.
Yeah, it'll be easier if someone sends you a link.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll send you a link.
DDOP's website has lots of information, but sometimes it's not intuitive.
can be hard to find things. David, you had something?
Yeah. So you said that about FARS data, about it not matching the crashes we've had here, the fatal crashes.
No, not FARS, open data. FARS usually matches.
Yeah, except for that they don't often have park police crashes, but I wasn't sure.
Right, yeah.
She was saying that she was seeing crashes in there that we weren't discussing, which would be totally bananas. Okay.
No, she was saying that she's seeing more DUIs, but FARS is going to have all the crashes, including the ones that are still pending, that haven't been criminally resolved. And
yeah,
we've seen those, so there would be a disparity.
One of the problems with FARS data is I think they submit the data like after 2 weeks and they don't go back and update it. So whatever it was they had at that time, that's what you get.
I mean, there's limitations, yeah, on the open data similarly, but typically what's in open data is the immediate,
Right.
the initial report.
So far, all the FARS data I've looked at has matched what I had from from our discussions, but not open data.
Yeah, FARS data is one of the bigger issues when you talk nationwide is that they don't include fatalities that happen after a certain amount of time passes.
Yeah.
They don't attribute it still to the traffic crash. I think just for when it was originally set up as a national database, just to make it easier, I don't think there's any like animus behind it. It's just that's the rule. So it can be different, but it doesn't have to be. And I think in New York, when I was there, we were having over 300 crash fatalities a year, and it was off and off by like 1. So
right. There's a few limitations, but I do know that they went back and did I'm sorry, I'm getting wonky now, but they went back and did a study, and they said, well, what if we included every single thing that people criticize us for leaving out, and they found like another 1% increase in crashes. So it wasn't. Yeah. That includes like people who died of carbon monoxide poisoning in their garage because they didn't get out of their car fast enough, stuff like that. So.
Right.
Yeah, there's some borderline cases. Well. It is. I mean, the people who come to major crash are the people who also fill in FARS. I believe it's is it Lieutenant Wilkins who does that, Terry?
That does FARS?
That enters the FARS data.
Yeah, I'm the FARS coordinator, but Fusan Nguyen and Detective Bruce are the analysts for DC.
Okay.
So those two detectives are the entering, and I'm the approval of it.
Okay. Sorry, I misspoke about that. Yeah, but you all are the ones putting it in.
I mean, you wouldn't know, but so we go to a FARS meeting once a year, which updates us on how they change a little here and there stuff, just like a grant meeting where a little bit of stuff changes per year, and then that's it. Then they're the analysts. They enter all of it, and like I think somebody was saying that there's 2 FARS levels. There's one that you have to immediately get numbers for a FARS, and you have to have all the 10% of the information in within like 4 or 5 days, and then it gives you like 3 months to enter the rest of it, and sometimes that stuff gets changed.
I see. Oh, interesting. I didn't realize that. That's Yeah, and then but FARS itself as a database doesn't get released to the public, as I understand it, until typically like 9 months after the end of the year. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, because after the end of the year, they then lock it, they do something with it, and then it's reopened for adjustments for so long before they release everything.
Okay.
So they have a madness to what they do.
Yeah. Okay, well, this is all really helpful to understand a little more of, and I'll connect with you, Terry, to have a little offline discussion about kind of maybe pre-work we could be doing with you, and Eileen about the report for this year.
Yeah,
I think next month's meeting, I think, is end of July. Are people going on vacation? I don't know, but I think let's go ahead and do it, and we'll try and review the report draft such as it is at that time, and talk through any critical issues, hopefully at that point, even if it's not ready for review. And then we'll hopefully try and get that done before too long and out to.
That sounds good.
All right, anyone else? Okay, hearing none, I guess, Jonathan, can you do the honors?
Yeah, so we just have to do a roll call since this is virtual. So, well, is there a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So
I
moved.
will, seconded.
Okay, Linda and Eileen. DDOT, yay or nay?
Yay.
MPD,
Yay. Is it yay? Yay.
yep, thank you. Pedestrian Advisory Council,
Yay.
Bicycle Advisory Council,
Yay.
Office of Planning,
Yay.
and then Multimodal Accessibility Advisory Council. Not sure if Helen made it or not. Perhaps not, but that's everyone, right? That was 6. Yes. Okay. So the yeas have it. Meeting adjourned, and we'll meet again in July.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Johnny.
Sure,
Thanks.
bye-bye.
Bye.